Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss of internet shitlords. And, as you can see, here is Lion and Dragon, the one that started it. And over here is Baptism of Fire. And here's 101 Sarmatians, the first source book for Baptism of Fire. Guess what we have in here? So this time, my publisher decided to be like really clever, and I don't know how I didn't think of this before either, but he decided that instead of releasing the finished product and then me waiting 8 weeks to get the book and only promoting it at that point, for the purpose of being able to promote it at the same time that it comes out, today, the day that this video goes live, I can tell you also, is the day that you get live The Last Vikings. So there we are. This is The Last Vikings, and this is basically going to be a flip through design notes type commentary on the product for you to have an idea of whether you will find it interesting or not. To start with, The Last Vikings is part of my historical authentic series, as are the other books. So this was the original main book, Lion and Dragon, which is meant for late medieval authentic role-playing. And this is Baptism of Fire, which is meant for early medieval authentic role-playing. This one's sort of set in England. Well, this one actually doesn't have a setting. The setting is Dark Albion, which is a separate book, but its default is, Western Europe, and then this is set in Poland. 101 Sarmatians expands the setting material, adds 101 different important NPCs, has a lot of other details in it, and including the cult of saints and other stuff, adventure cues and such. It's very worth checking out. And now we have The Last Vikings. So people wanted me to do more stuff in the kind of Baptism of Fire vein. And I was, and there have been times in the past where people had said, "Hey, why don't you do a Viking game?" Right? And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I'm not so sure. They're, the kind of the standard Viking thing has already been done. I'm not really convinced of how valuable it is, like to have to do another one." But then, something happened. As I was researching Baptism of Fire, I found out that there is there's an island off the Pomeranian coast called Bolin, and this island is one of the places that is most suspected of having been the location of a Viking stronghold called Jomsburg. And having looked into it very carefully, it's the one that best fits everything. It explains everything if Jomsburg was in Volin. Because in Volin, that island was sometimes under the influence of the Danes and sometimes under the influence of the Poles through Pomerania. And the important thing about this settlement called Jomsburg is that it became the last stronghold of pagan Vikings in anywhere in the Baltic or the North Sea, right? So outside of Greenland, by the time of this setting, so this is the default setting starts in the year 995. By that time, pretty much every Scandinavian country is ruled by a Christian. And in many of those countries, much of their population has become Christian as well. Some have less than others. There's some that are, some places are still have more pagans among the common people. But very clearly, Christianity's on the way out, right? And so the only settlement of importance, a settlement that has, let's say, the capacity to run itself and to defend itself, that was still pagan, was Jomsburg, and there's a reason why that happens, and I explain it in the book, and it explains why Jomsburg would have been able to continue in that way for as long as it did, and basically it was because of a deal that happened between Svein Forkbeard, the king of Denmark, and Boleslav the Brave, the king of Poland. He was actually a duke at the time, but same difference. Where Svein Forkbeard married Boleslav's sister, Sviatoslava, who was later known as Sigrid the Haughty. And she was the mother of Knut the Great and a couple of other sons that also became kings. And they this marriage, though, was a part of a pact, right? It was a deal basically between Boleslav and Svein Forkbeard that Svein would not try to attack or invade Pomerania anymore, and that they would, so they would focus their raiding in other directions, and that's part of what moved Svein Forkbeard to focus his raiding, I think, on Britain instead of the coast of Poland. And it also explains what happened to Jomsburg, because Jomsburg was a fortress under the control of Svein Forkbeard. In fact, Svein Forkbeard apparently might have spent many of his formative years in Jomsburg when he was a kid, right? And then, because of this pact, he had to renounce claim to the island of Bolin. That's the theory that I'm working on here, right? Because it means that he was no longer able to exert influence there, but the people that were at Jomsburg, he instead gifted them because they were the people who raised him, right? Especially the guy that was in charge of the fortress. He basically made them independent. He gave them the fortress. He said, "You guys can be in charge." And from there, the Joms Vikings, the Jomsburg guards that were there became the Joms Vikings, which were like one of the earliest warrior brotherhoods. Now, a lot of this could be partly, like the part I'm talking about, the political part. I think that explains how Jomsburg could have existed. The rest of it is a little bit mythical, of course. There are mythical elements to it. So, Last Vikings the book has 120 pages. It's 120 pages long. And so this is a rule book. It only has rules. This is a rule and setting book, right? It has the rules and settings. Now, officially, Last Vikings is a source book for Baptism of Fire. It also has some rules and setting. Now, it's not a complete game the way that both Lion and Dragon and Baptism of Fire are. So in this book, you will find that I have provided, for example, details of all the character classes, character creation, right? How to make the names and stuff like that. And all of the classes, including remakes, like, for example, like the Thief is the same as the Thief in Baptism of Fire and Lion and Dragon, but I put it in there for easy reference, basically. So whatever class you want to make, you can make it from here, right? But this doesn't have the rules for combat. It doesn't have any other rules of that sort of thing, right? It doesn't have it doesn't have any mechanical rules, except for the new magic systems that are in there. But if you want to run this with something, it's not a complete game. So you can, obviously, you can run it with Baptism of Fire. In that case, if you have Baptism of Fire, that's everything you need to play the Last Vikings, right? You can also run it with Lion and Dragon. In that case, there are probably a couple of magical techniques that are not in Lion and Dragon, but that are in either the Old School Companion 3 or Baptism of Fire, that are mentioned in some of the classes. Now, you could just choose to change those around for magical techniques that are found in Lion and Dragon if you wanted to do the shortcut, right? And third, you could basically also use any OSR core book, right? Old School Essentials, Labyrinth Lord, or whatever. And in that case, you could use either the classes that are here, which are Lion and Dragon and Baptism of Fire style classes, or you could use the classes in the system that you're using, right? Or you could keep the classes, but have that the magic that is included in the Last Vikings is basically additional ritual magic in place of the traditional Vancian spellcasting. Obviously, there isn't Vancian spellcasting in Last Vikings. So those are all the various options of what you could run this with. But basically, if you've got an OSR game, you will be able to run this, and you'll be able to use all of the material in it, right? So it starts with the introduction there, and then you get, as usual with me, a timeline of events, right? And it starts with 995, and this is basically the timeline of the campaign. It goes from 995 to 1042. That's the length that you would play. And the standard campaign is that you guys are members, your characters are members of the Order of Jom's Vikings. However, there's no reason that has to be the case, right? If you're not into that, if you want to play like guys that are fighting with, on behalf of Canute the Great, right? Or, Olaf Tryggvason or whoever, right? If you want to have, in other words, any other kind of Viking, you can play any other kind of Viking with this too, right? There's nothing special about Jom's Vikings that makes them different except for the fact of their religion. They are the last pagan Vikings. But if you want to play a Christian Viking, right, a recent convert, you can do that too. That's fine. That it's just that because Jomsburg is part of the world of, the immediate setting of Baptism of Fire, I immediately thought, that's a great idea, right? And of course, since in Baptism of Fire, by default, characters play Christians who are trying to bring the light of Christianity to the dark pagan world. Here you have the Joms Vikings, and they're like the last pagans of the Norsemen, and they're trying to remain true to their old gods in a world where Christianity is just consuming everything in its cultural path, so to say. Viking characters, you create characters the same way as in Lion and Dragon or Baptism of Fire. So social class is very important. All of the medieval elements are the same in importance here. Social class, religion, the role of women, brutality, the virtues, all of those apply here, And in fact, if you're familiar with Baptism of Fire, there's an optional set of rules about virtue and vice, which are presented in the appendix. You can use them as a way to, if you do lots of virtuous things, you can become more famous. If you do lots of vices, you can also become more famous, but for bad reasons. And in the basic character sheet for Baptism of Fire, it has a section where it lists vices and virtues. And the virtues are obviously the Christian virtues. But here, because this is a pagan character, the virtues are the pagan virtues instead of the vices, instead of the Christian virtues. So that is showing kind of a bit of a difference there. Here, obviously, you've got Viking names, which again are names that would have all been common at the time in the region. Obviously, they're not all the names that existed, but they are the ones that we know of, right? Sort of thing. There's also some Christian names, because of course you could be playing a Christian character. And then the classes, well, you have, certain classes from Lion and Dragon Baptism of Fire are not going to be on here. They're not going to have the Holy Man or the Holy Warrior. Now, you could play one. You can totally grab a Holy Warrior from Baptism of Fire, or Holy Man, or a Cleric from Lion and Dragon, and have them show up in Viking land, right? Because they would exist, but they are explicitly Christian, and so they're not going to be default to the Jomsburg setting, right? If you're playing a game where you're working for the King of Norway or something, then you probably could play a Cleric or a Holy Man or a Holy Warrior. So you got the fighter, the archer, the thief, the woodsman. You don't have any specific exact substitute for either the magic user, the magister as it's called in Lion and Dragon, which also Baptism of Fire doesn't have, or the cleric, right? There isn't a pagan version of the cleric, but what there are three different classes, all of which use Norse magic. And the first is the berserker, which isn't really magic. This is more religion, you could say, right? So this is the classic berserker as he appears in Norse mythology, which means he's not, as we believe it, just a dude that was, psychotically violent and very, very tough, right? He is that, of course. But the thing is, berserkers were devotees, right? They were religious fanatics that were devoted to Odin, and they were connected very deeply to this kind of primordial spirituality. that they made the use of animal spirits to gain strength in battle, right? When they entered the berserk state. So the berserker in this game, he's a very tough warrior, but besides that, he can end up obtaining the ability, like he has the ability to enter a berserk state, right? And then beyond that, he can end up getting the ability to align itself with a spirit animal, which can be a bear, a boar, or a wolf. And that will give you certain abilities. And then if you somehow survive to be a very high level berserker, you can learn the power of Hamfarir, which is essentially the same power as the Kresnik has in among pagans in Baptism of Fire, Polish pagans, which is that you can gain the power to leave your own body and possess the body of an animal. And so those are the things that a berserker can do, right? Then you have the Vitki. The Vitki is, of course, the classic Norse wizard, but they are very specialist, right? A Vitki is essentially a rune master. You know, he's a guy that is an expert on all elements of runic magic. Now they do sometimes learn a few other magical skills, but they don't cast as wide a net. Definitely not as much as the Magister in Lion and Dragon, or as even as like a witch hunter or Skomrozny from Baptism of Fire. So the Vitki is a super specialist. And on account of this, so he can get a few other abilities, but not a lot. And so I repeat all of the existing elements because in Baptism of Fire you have the section on the runes, and it shows you the various different levels of power of what the runes can do. But here I add one more power that is only something the Vitkis have, which is the advanced bind runes. And these are very powerful magic you can do with runes. And then you have the Vulva, which is basically a Cirrus, which were very, very important as well. And now the Vitki were masculine wizards, right? That was like the masculine side of magic, whereas the Vulva are the feminine side of magic. Almost all Vitki were men. There were occasional accounts of some woman, right? But for the most part, they were men. And Vulva are usually women. However, there are also a number of males called Seidmen who are usually highly effeminate and have homosexual tendencies, right? Because this is a female magic that is a feminine magic that is being applied here, right? And Vulva don't really do much with runes. What they do is they are capable of doing Seder magic and Galder magic, both of which are very powerful forms of magic that are based not on the kind of knowledge of the runes that the Vitki has, but on the power of either focus or ecstasy, right? Of either control or ecstasy. And they're like Seder magic is magic that essentially allows one to have visions at first, and then later it can even allow you to affect and change the past, or change the future, or see the past, or weave someone's destiny, right? There are many stories in Norse mythology about heroes or kings that run into a Vulva and she makes a prediction and the guy's doomed after that, right? Or on the contrary, that there was one guy, I forget his name now, but he's in the story here. His mom was a Vulva. He was a warlord, right? And he wanted to be sure that he was going to have victory in battle. And his mom said, yes, go into battle, make a standard in the form of a raven, and you will win the fight. But whoever's carrying the standard will die, right? And that's exactly what happened, right? That sort of thing. But they can weave the paths of fate. And then Galder is this magic that is of a great musical vibration, right? It's basically mantras in the Norse sense, where you have to do a music check to succeed at it, and it involves chanting or intoning a kind of magic song that alters reality. And these are a collection of spells of Galder spells that can do any number of different things. They each do their own thing, and so you will learn them bit by bit as you're there, right? Economy and equipment. You'll note I keep the denarii designation because actually in 995, the Scandinavians were very late in producing their own kind of current economy currency, right? So I just kept the denarii thing. So the prices are kept at the same, with the same currency as in Baptism of Fire, so as to make it less complicated. Because in fact, they didn't have their own currency at the time. They were mostly using coins that they stole from people when they were Vikings, right? Which kind of makes sense, right? There's a few new weapons in here that are weapons that were popular among the Norsemen, but not among the Poles. There's some prices and whatnot. There's different things for social, depending by social class, right? And then we get to the section on Norse paganism, where I give you some important basic introductions to the different major gods of the Norse pantheon. I have not gone into enormous detail in this, right? But I give a bit about the Viking world tree. This is obviously something that in a supplement I could probably add more stuff to. But I didn't want to make the main product go too far into like the esoteric elements of the Norse mythology. And then we have a section on ships and seafaring. So there's a thing on Viking naval warfare. Incidentally, Vikings did not like doing naval warfare. They very rarely got into fights at sea. They hated that because it was super dangerous for them. Remember, they're in a goddamn long ship, right? They don't really have effective battering rams. Believe it or not, that is not a battering ram, right? That doesn't really do much of anything. They don't have cannons. They don't have large-scale weapons that they can launch at great distance. So for them, like a naval battle largely involved having to get really close to the enemy and then ships breaking up and people drowning, and it's terrible, right? So they didn't like it a lot, but it did happen. So I put it in there with some rules for how to manage that ship-to-ship combat. I put some rules about how it is like when you have a crew, right? Like how do you determine your crew's capacity and morale? Stuff on sea voyages, special maneuvers, prevailing winds, naval encounters, travel times, and then of course a section on trade, right? Because the Jom's Vikings were warriors, but they could be also doing trade. And of course you might be playing non-Jom's Vikings, in which case you might be doing a lot of trade, right? So it covers into some areas of the different lands that the Vikings went to and the prices of certain goods. And I repeat the haggling table there. And then we get to locations of the Jom's Vikings world. So basically, this campaign, in terms of areas that you could go to, covers the entire Baltic and North Sea region. It doesn't go down to the Mediterranean. I settled with the upper areas, because that's where most of the action was going on at the time, right? Apart from Byzantium. And for each country that is, or region that is in that area, I give a brief description and sometimes a brief timeline that is specific to the country and supplementary to the main timeline at the beginning. Of course, some of them get a lot more than other. England gets a lot more information because it's England, I guess. Francia, that's France, right? And Greenland, Iceland, Ireland. Ireland gets a lot of information too, because at that time there was a very powerful Viking warlord in charge of Dublin, actually, right? Citric Silkbeard was his name. And so there was a lot going on there. Whereas then, Karelia gets a fairly minor mention, though I do point out that the Vikings were kind of scared of Finns because they thought they were mighty wizards. The Kiev Rus, of course, I have quite a bit in there. Some of that is already stuff that happens in Baptism of Fire. Then Norway, the Orkney Islands. So in every section, basically, you're getting background on the current situation, what the place is like, and what is going on in it, right? And of course, the last entry is Bolin Island, which is where the Jomsburg are. Then we get to monsters, right? And there are some very interesting Viking monsters. So one of them is the Brunmigi, which is a shape-shifting evil fox spirit that it mainly what it likes to do is go into cities or towns and pee inside the wells so that everybody gets sick. But it's really dangerous, actually. It can wipe out a whole village that way, right? So it's tricky. Then we got the dragons, the Draugr, which are a type of Norse white, the dwarves, we got elves, obviously, fishmen, Fylgia, giants, and then some more unusual stuff like the Hogbui, Huldra, mermaids, Norse style, Nokke, which is pretty freaking terrifying, sea serpents. Well, the sea serpents are very freaking terrifying, as are giant squids if you're at sea, right? Shades. As you can see, the illustrations in here are fantastic. Production values, Mad Scribe, Chris Miller made all of the production of the book. I only did the writing. And it looks fantastic. To me, it's great. Then you have an appendix that has a set of random mission tables. And Appendix 2 is magic items, and you get a whole slew of Norse magic items. And that is basically what you get with The Last Vikings. And I think that it gives you everything you need at the basic level, apart from, a main system, but it gives you everything to run the setting apart from the rules. And of course, if you have either Lion and Dragon or Baptism of Fire, you're golden. And if not, you can use any other OSR book. Though I would really strongly recommend you pick up Baptism of Fire. If you're looking at The Last Vikings now and you think this is cool, go find my review section. I've got a whole playlist where I've been going like chapter by chapter about what's in Baptism of Fire. And I am sure that you are going to find it badass, right? So you're going, if you like this, you're going to like this, okay? So check it out, because it'll probably be worth your while, because it's a system that is made to be run in early medieval, in the real world early medieval. By the way, check this out. There you go. She's already sleeping by the box this came in. And it gives you all of like the real magic, the real monsters as they were in the minds of the people who lived at the time, right? And the real culture, same thing, cultural norms. So it is really worth it. Get Baptism of Fire as well as The Last Vikings if you don't have those, and get 101 Sarmatians too if you're going to be playing it all in Poland, because 101 Sarmatians gives a lot more information and detail to a Polish campaign. So there we are. I guess that's everything for today. I hope that you're going to check it out. The link to Last Vikings is going to be obviously near the top of this video. So click on the more button at the description of the video, and there should be a link there to where you can get The Last Vikings, which essentially is drive-through RPG, right? So go and pick it up, and I'm sure you're not going to be disappointed. It's a great source book, not too huge, but giving you all the stuff that you're going to really want to make use of in a practical way, right? There's very little in here that is impractical. Like the section on the gods, I've tried to keep it short but packed with info. And the section on countries and the timeline are something that you will use in the course of the campaign if you are running the campaign and you care about the timeline, right? So those are like the least useful things in here. Everything else is basically game stuff for using while you are playing, right? And I think that's always a good idea to have. To have more of that, than the alternative, to have just a bunch of fluff, right? So check it out, Last Vikings, and check out all my other products as well. I'm not sure if by now, no, I don't think so. I think probably my latest issue of the Pundit Files is still going to be Madness. Though I don't know, it depends because I'm recording this beforehand, if Chris takes a while to load up drive-through to actually activate Last Vikings, maybe by now it'll be the Dungeon of Doom. But either way, go to the Red Room store and check out the Pundit Files, and whether it's the Madness rules or the incredible Dungeon of Doom created by Sandy Peterson's grandson, you're going to love it either way. All right, so check those out too. And I guess that's everything for today. Currently smoking. This is a Nira Poker with Argento Roots.